was made easier by the rather early innovation of what's called neo-imperialism, or
guided more by the problem than by the discipline that I started out working. I mean, when I look at a college curriculum and see how it's divided, and we've got curriculum committees that redivide them like once a week or once a month, and then once a year I mean, I don't give a damn what studies this or who talks about it, but that it's
also, but nobody ever asked, well, why? Why are they doing all this stuff?
produces a situation in which human beings themselves don't feel rational.
In the U.S. was made easier by the rather early innovation of what's called neo-imperialism, or
Guided more by the problem than by the discipline that I started out working. I mean, when I look at a college curriculum,
I was muted. What's happening? Everybody, how you doing? I think I'm ready to go. Not quite, almost. Here we go. All right. What's happening, everybody? I'm going to read some more. Professor Hans-Georg Moeller, the radical Luhmann, and all that cool stuff. What's happening? I don't know. I don't even know if my audio is good. Actually, I should probably check on that, huh? Don't you think? Professor Hans-Georg. Yeah, whatever. It's not great, but it's functional. Oh, I gotta turn my lamp on, dude. Yowza. What's up? What's up, internet? How you doing? We're coming back to Professor Hans-Georg Moeller's The Radical Luhmann. We left off on chapter 5. And yeah, I don't know if I'm going to get this done today or not. I initially was hoping I'd be able to just do one more reading session and be done with it. But I wanted to get it done earlier. And I just didn't. So now I'm trying to get it done today. So we'll see if I get it. I probably won't get it done today. So there probably will be a part 3. So that's cool. Yeah, and all that stuff. So yeah, I guess we'll just get rid. Well, hold on. I guess I'm not ready. I should have prepared better. Just got home a little bit ago from skateboarding. Took me a little shower, and my dog Winston. His name is Winston Churchill. He is a English bulldog, and we got him to keep our French bulldog company. Our French bulldog, Charlize Theron, is a little guy, but she's not a guy. She's a girl, but she's a little baby. And we had the opportunity to get Winston, and we did. So now we have a French bulldog and an English bulldog and a pug. Pig the pug is very old. She's over 15 years old. She's old and she's still kicking around. She's hanging in there. But yeah, so Winston has been going ham this morning. He's a little over a year old and he's been like just running around like an idiot because nobody wants to play with him today. Because yesterday, all the dogs got fed twice, which normally we feed them once in the morning. That's whatever. If someone out there says, no, that's not the right way to do it, whatever. We feed them in the morning. And they got fed twice yesterday. There was some miscommunication. And they didn't get walked yesterday either. And that is actually a problem. I was busy all day yesterday. And I asked multiple members of my household to walk the dogs because I couldn't do it. Because I was busy. And they didn't. Because they're all too busy doing I don't know what. And yeah, I am resentful. It bothers me. It makes me angry. Anyway, so they didn't get walked yesterday. Charlie ate just like the tremendous amount of food, and she's feeling sick today. So she's not playing with Winston today. So Winston has been running around by himself like an idiot, having fun, and it's super cute. Winston is very cute. I have cute dogs. I think most dogs are cute. There are dogs that I think are not cute. So I can't say I think all dogs are cute because there's definitely dogs that suck. But my dogs are cute. And it's not just because they're mine. Like obviously when it's yours, you're like biased. But I think my dogs are objectively cute. Like they're kawaii. Like the French bulldogs are kawaii, which is like objectively cute, right? That's why people like them. Big old heads, big old eyes. Cute, tiny little bodies, like, no, I'm not even going to say that. Yeah, people with dwarfism are also kawaii. And so are French bulldogs. And Winston is also very cute. And Pig is also very cute. All the dogs are very cute. So yeah, now Winston's all tuckered out and he's laying on the ground and he's looking at me. So we are going to get right into it. So yeah, fuck it. Yesterday was the birthday. First of all, it was Dave's birthday. Happy birthday, Dave. And it was also the first birthday of Theory Underground. So that was really cool. Happy birthday. I'm not big on marking dates and celebrating dates. I think calendars are horrible things, and they've stolen our freedom, and we need to liberate ourselves from calendars. And this is true. Like, it sounds absurd, but I don't know. I've been working on writing a piece for a very long time, and it wasn't until earlier this year when I realized I want to call it the fascism of the calendar, just to be like sensational and like clickbaity or whatever. But I do think it's absurd that we like live our lives according to calendars, and like people don't exercise their agency to like do things on their own, and then they wait for the calendar to tell them to do things. And like birthdays and holidays and anniversaries are never, for me in my experience, they're never like as awesome as they should be, because people are always like stressed out and like bothered, and they're like, oh, I have to do this and this and this and this and this. And it's like, well, yeah, but did you get to enjoy the time you were supposed to be spending with people? Like, no, because I was busy cooking or cleaning or organizing or traveling or arguing with the, drunk uncle, or like all these things that people wind up like not actually enjoying, but they like bend themselves into like crazy emotional pretzels over. And it just sucks. Like, I think we all should just like, I don't know, do what we got going on, and not worry about what the calendar is telling us to do. But having said all that, it still is worth noting that It was the first year of Theory Underground. That is an achievement. So happy birthday, Theory Underground. So there's that. That was cool. That's why I was busy and I couldn't walk the dogs yesterday. And then today is today's Pearl Harbor Day, and it's also a lot of other things to a lot of other people. So yeah, there's all that. We're gonna go ahead and get right into chapter 5. And what is this? Like 10 minutes, almost 11 minutes. Yeah. Stop wasting time. Chapter 5. The last footnote to Plato, a solution to the mind-body problem. One of the most useful of Luhmann's radicalisms is what I would dare to call nothing less than a convincing solution to the mind-body problem that has haunted the history of ideas in the West for 2.5 millennia. Given the contingent character of the theory, it should be noted right away that this is not to say it is the solution to the mind-body problem. Luhmann's solution to this problem necessarily arises from the contingency of the problem. It is part of the semantic heritage or history that Luhmann's theory relates to. The problem is, to begin with, not so much a substantial problem as a conceptual one. As always, solution can only mean an observational construct. Such a solution solves a problem in a Wittgensteinian sense, namely by increasing the clarity of the terminology and thereby reducing the abuse of the language. The history of the mind-body dualism dates back to Plato and the Phaedo, the Republic, and other of his major works. This dualism has at least 3 dimensions. First, an ontological distinction between different ways of being, physical and intellectual being. Whatever is either physical or intellectual, or contains elements of both. Second, an epistemological distinction between different kinds of knowledge. Whatever we know, we either know through our senses or our mind, or through a combination of both. And third, an ethical distinction with respect to what we value and accordingly how we live. We strive toward either material or ideal goods, or a mixture of the two. These distinctions, as most famously illustrated in the allegories of the cave, the lion and the sun in the Republic, are explicitly hierarchical. The soul exists in a substantially more profound way than the body. It is immortal, while the body is not. Thought leads us to truth, while sensual knowledge leaves us only with appearances, and to live by cherishing what is morally good rather than what is materially valuable is the only way to real happiness. Notwithstanding possible modifications of this stark three-dimensional dualism in other works by Plato, which some scholars may point at in order to defend Plato against charges from post-dualistic thinkers, it is beyond doubt that, historically speaking, it had a profound influence on the further development of mainstream Western religion and philosophy ranging from Christianity, St. Augustine and others, to Descartes and Spinoza, and then on to Kant and Hegel. One could write a whole series of books describing in detail how each of these thinkers integrated, criticized, sharpened, or softened the ontological, the epistemological, and the ethical aspects of the Platonic mind-body dualism. In many ways, Whitehead was entirely correct when he famously stated that European philosophy essentially kept itself busy with producing footnotes to Plato, or more precisely, footnotes to Plato's triple distinction. The attitude of the footnote writers changed considerably in the 19th century. With authors like Marx and Nietzsche, reactions to the triple dualism became much more hostile. With Hegel and Feuerbach, idealism had reached its highest forms of expression and was bound to decline. The old hierarchy, that had previously been challenged by some, for instance Spinoza, is now attacked openly. The values are to be re-evaluated. Hegel has to be turned from his head to his feet by Marx, and Plato and Socrates have to be exposed as responsible for the decay of philosophy by Nietzsche. It is, for Marx, material being that determines consciousness, and not the other way around. One of the great errors that plagued Western thought, as Nietzsche proclaims, was to confuse the relation between the physical and the spiritual. When we eat frugally, We may deceive ourselves that by our free will, we impose a diet on our body. In fact, Nietzsche says we only hide from ourselves the real causes and effects, which are exactly vice versa. When we intellectually decide to go on a diet, we do so only because our body is already too sick to eat freely. Marx and Nietzsche, each in their own specific way, inverted Plato's threefold hierarchy. For Marx, what we are economically is more substantial than what we may be intellectually. To understand our material conditions is more fundamental than to understand the world spiritually. The real moral responsibility of the philosopher is to change the material world rather than to merely add another moralistic interpretation. For Nietzsche, our physiology characterizes us more than our mind. Thus, to know ourselves physiologically is more interesting than reflecting on our soul, and perhaps most important for him, in order to overcome our traditional slave morality, we have to honestly affirm our physiology rather than construct a system of values that nihilistically restricts the forces of life. In the 20th century, the reevaluation of Plato's triple dualism continues. Freud transforms Nietzsche's philosophy into a psychological theory and scientifically outlines how human existence, both individually and collectively, is founded on unconscious drives, wishes, and anxieties that spring from our physiological being, that is, our sexuality and digestion. In philosophy, a phenomenology of life, energies, and the body becomes popular. Bergson, Merleau-Ponty, and later on, feminist and deconstructionist ideas are infused into the humanities and the social sciences, and by focusing on gender issues, contribute to the demise of older phallocentric and logocentric hierarchies. If, at least academically, the Platonic reign of the soul over the physical has been largely discredited, this does not mean that, philosophically speaking, the age-old mind-body problem has been solved. The traditional order has been thoroughly shattered, and one can now choose between various ways of attributing ontological, epistemological, or ethical non-priority to mind and body, respectively. However, the old vocabulary, along with its philosophical grammar in the Wittgensteinian sense, still prevails. And this is not only academically true, but also in ordinary language. We can still use the word brain in such sentences as, she is the brains behind Pa, or use your brain. It is still believed that brain science can actually find out how whatever happens physiologically in the brain determines what happens in our mind. That is, how we think and feel. Alternatively, we believe that many illnesses are psychosomatic. Stress leads to anxiety, and anxiety leads to bodily malfunctions. On the positive side, our mental attitude may allow us to win a sports competition. If we are appropriately motivated, we will perhaps outperform our physically advantaged opponent. The triple dualism is still both academically and in ordinary life a most essential common sense, ontological, epistemological, and ethical concept. While the dominance of the soul over the body is no longer an accepted theory, there is still something like a common consensus that the world is made up of the physical and the intellectual, that we can know things either through reflection or experience, and that we can act according to material or ideal values. In this sense, Plato's triple dualism is still as alive as it ever was. Modern Western philosophy succeeded in loosening the hierarchical and dynamic structure of the mind-body dualism, but it did not succeed in, or probably more correctly, never had the intention of, replacing the model as such. Demands for integrating the mental and the physical into a psychosomatic continuum and for acknowledging the material as the basis for the ideal still operate well within the traditional mind-body semantics. They offer alternative and, in part, novel ways of arranging the concepts in relation to one another, but they stick to the traditional pattern of conceiving of ontological, epistemological, and ethical issues in mind-body terms. This semantic continuity cannot but perpetuate what may be called the chronic discursive illness that has been labeled the mind-body problem. When Descartes, for instance, tried to answer how to practically follow his demand for overcoming the passions of the soul, i.e., a state in which the soul is passively subjected to an active body, and for exerting intellectual domination of the material, he was forced to somehow explain how one agency, namely res cogitans, can concretely exert its control over another and substantially different agency, namely res extensa. In other words, how can the mind actually get in touch with the body, or how can the body physically direct mental activity? Descartes came up with a daring hypothesis that nowadays seems rather curious. He maintained that the soul had its principal seat in the little gland which exists in the middle of the brain, the so-called pineal gland, and the power to move this gland in such a way that animal spirits could be emitted and sent to the various body parts through the blood and nerves in order to steer the machine of the body. However, as Descartes pointed out, a weak soul was not powerful enough to exert such control, and thus the steering mechanism could also work in reverse. In the case of a weak soul, the body would be able to force the soul into passivity, the state of passion, and control it by directing the motions of the pineal gland. In a state of passionate love or anger, for instance, our physical impulses are thus able to subdue our intellect. Descartes' model is a simple form of a cybernetic mechanism. That is, a mechanism consisting of an active steering part and another part that is passively steered, just like a car. As long as we are fully conscious, we are able to impose on the car we are driving the direction that it has to take. If, however, we are drunk or fall asleep at the wheel, the steering relation is reversed, and the car will take us with it and manipulate our movements. The mind-body, or consciousness-matter, relations suggested by Nietzsche, Marx, and Freud may well be more complicated than Descartes', but they are still at the level of mechanistic cybernetics. They are about various degrees of agency and passion, of being in control or being controlled. Similarly, most contemporary scientific and popular models of mind-body interaction will try to outline or predict the effects that certain physiological processes have on mental ones, or vice versa. Brain scientists produce research on what sort of brain activity produces what sort of emotional and cognitive effects. And some psychotherapists will instruct their clients on how to heal themselves through positive thinking or other cognitive therapies. The Cartesian hypothesis about the concrete interaction between the soul and the body is now obsolete, but interactionism as such remains a popular option for mind-body mechanics. Thus, the mind-body problem remains unresolved. There are a number of vague ideas about how the brain can practically steer the mind, or how the mind can steer the brain, or how both can steer one another psychosomatically, but there is not one commonly accepted theoretical replacement for the pineal gland. That such steering happens is commonly assumed, but still no one knows how it works. In other words, most contemporary views on the relation between mind and body are simply mop-up operations, working within the general Cartesian paradigm, to use Thomas Kuhn's terminology. Luhmann is one of those theoreticians who try to radically depart from, to again use Kuhn's terminology, this kind of normal science. He is, I believe, able to provide a convincing solution to the mind-body problem, which mechanistic models derived from the traditional Platonic triple dualism have failed to do. Luhmann's break with the normal science of the mind-body relation and his subsequent solution to the mind-body problem is twofold. First, he adds a third concept to the dualism, namely communication, or society as the system of communication, and thus transform the dualism into a triadism, which could also be understood as a pluralism. Second, he explains how the relations between these three systemic realms can be conceived differently from the traditional mechanical steering conceptions. He replaces a mechanistic cybernetics of steering with the second-order cybernetics of system-environment configurations. I first discuss Luhmann's triadism pluralism, and then his second-order cybernetics. Triadism pluralism is the section heading. Unlike Descartes, Luhmann considers the mind and body not substances but systems. The use of the term system already denotes a shift from an ontological to a functional perspective. Systems are processes, not static things. Luhmann's systemic triadism is concerned with operations and not with what essentially is. A system is a functional entity that is operationally distinct from, and so distinguishable from, other systems. It is, so to speak, a sequence of events that connect with one another, that is, that go along with one another diachronically, synchronically, or both. Luhmann focuses on autopoietic and operationally closed systems. That a system is autopoietic means that it is not externally produced or constructed, but instead produces, constructs, and perpetuates or reproduces itself. Its operational closure means that its operations can only connect with its own operations, but not with those of any other system. Be right back. I had to let Winston out. He was like, I want to go bravely into that dark night, except that dark night was the living room. So, but that's what he was like. He was like, go bravely into that bright living room. It's not dark, it's a bright living room. But he gets it. He's only a dog, you know. He didn't actually read anything Winston Churchill said. He's just named after Winston Churchill. Actually, in a weird way, he's named after Dave's dad. In a weird way. Because like Dave's dad is like, yeah, Winston Churchill's dope. And then I was like, yeah, cool. And then we got the dog. And then like he looked like Winston Churchill. And I was like, oh, he looks like Winston Churchill. But I wouldn't have been thinking about Winston Churchill had it not been for the conversation Dave and I were having about Winston Churchill that was inspired by his dad. So in a weird way, my dog is named after Dave's dad. That's kind of funny. Oh, where was I, dude? Which means that its operations can only connect with its own operations, but not with those of any other systems. Did I read that? No. Its operational closure means that its operations can only connect with its own operations, but not with those of any other system. An example of a biological or physical system, that is, a living system, is the human body. The human body includes subsystems, such as the visual system and the immune system, but subsystems are not to be confused with parts that constitute a whole. All operations within living systems are life operations, such as biochemical processes, hormonal processes, neurological processes, and so on. Each system functions by continuing its own operations with further operations of the same kind. The immune system, for instance, continues to function by further immune reactions. It cannot continue to function by visual operations. The system's function cannot be taken over by the visual system or vice versa. A system is not a body part or an organ that can be potentially replaced by a spare part. One cannot transplant an immune system, nor can it be amputated like an arm or taken out like the appendix. The view of the body as a biological life system, including a number of subsystems, is therefore substantially different from a mechanistic view of the body as a whole, consisting of parts. Phil says, Moeller's Luhmann Explained, From Souls to Systems is an excellent resource. He makes Luhmann accessible for dopes like me. That's awesome. I'm actually going to check that out, From Souls to Systems. Hell yeah. The operations of biological systems are not dictated or steered or produced from the outside by a divine watchmaker. Any biological system is an effect of the evolution of life and not some ready-made machine. Systems change by evolving. Different forms of life, non-human life, for instance, have evolved differently. Some living systems do not have visual systems, but this does not mean that they lack anything. They are no less alive and no less able to function, reproduce, and come up with non-visual cognition. An example of a psychic system is the human mind. Mental operations are thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on. A mental system is operationally closed in the sense that no mind can directly interfere with the operations of another mind. One cannot continue someone else's mental activities by thinking or feeling for him or her. It is also impossible to immediately think what someone else is thinking or to feel what someone else is feeling. We can hear what others say or see an expression of pain or joy on their face, but we cannot literally think or feel what they do. Psychic systems are autopoietic. Just like living systems, they are integrated into evolutionary processes and exposed to environmental perturbations. However, they are not created or steered like a machine by any external agency. In the fact that for Luhmann, these psychic systems are closed to one another is where I draw the line from Levinas to Luhmann, or from, I don't know, maybe not from one to the other, but draw a line in between the two. And I want to make a comparison where Luhmann is saying we're close to one another, but we still have an idea of one another. And that idea of one another is, of course, based off of us. Whereas Levinas is kind of saying we're close to one another and we just have no idea what's going on. Or something like that. And I think that's an interesting contrast that I want to continue to think about, because I don't know. Maybe we're not even actually close to one another. I don't know. Who knows? Communication systems are social systems. In other words, society consists of communicative operations. Such operations can be performed as speech or writing, that is, through language, but also by a large number of other means. For instance, through signs, gestures, and facial expressions, as well as through monetary payments, the assigning of grades, the issuing of documents, the production of images, the composition of music, or a kiss on the cheek. Social systems are operationally closed and autopoietic as well. Communication in the education system can only be continued with further communication of the same kind. If I no longer lecture during my lectures, but instead insist on only singing beautiful songs, I will be fired after a while. Nor are social systems, contrary to some modern humanist narratives, man-made. The economy cannot be planned, and the legal system was not established as the result of an invention by some clever individuals on a specific day in history. Just like living systems and psychic systems, social systems, such as the law, the economy, and the mass media, emerged through evolutionary processes, and they are continually changing. Autopoietic systems are not necessarily limited to the body, mind, and society. It can be imagined that there are or will be other types of operationally closed and autopoietic systems. In his later works, Luhmann repeatedly speculated, albeit without elaboration, about the possibility of, for instance, the emergence of novel autopoietic systems that may operate on the basis of computer technology. So far, computers, like all other machines, operate allopoietically and not autopoietically, meaning they are not operationally closed. They are not yet self-generating and self-reproducing, and it is possible to immediately interfere in their operations. For instance, I am pressing a key on a keyboard right now, which is how the text that you are reading is currently being produced. No brain, social system, or mind can be steered in the way I steer my computer while writing this text. Therefore, a better candidate for a fourth category of systems would perhaps be a non-living natural system, such as the global climate. In theory, Luhmann acknowledges the possibility of replacing mind-body dualism with an unlimited pluralism. Concretely and in the present, The knowledge of the existence of autopoietic systems is nevertheless limited to three: living systems, psychic systems, and communication systems. The operational closure of the three types of systems excludes the possibility of mutual steering processes like those envisioned by Descartes with respect to body and soul. There is no pineal gland by which the operations of one system are mechanically connected with those of another. This guarantees, so to speak, the operational autonomy of each system, and thereby is functional difference. The functional differentiation replaces the substantial or ontological differentiation as conceived by Plato and Descartes. While the mind-body dualism was an ontological and/or substance dualism, the mind-body communication triad is a functional triad. Instead of substantial distinctions, there are functional differences. Even Marx, arguably the most profound social theorist of the 19th century, was incapable of expanding the traditional dualism and replacing it with a triadism or pluralism. He did not acknowledge that society is neither ideal nor material, but social. That is, a system not constituted by physical or mental operations, but by communication. Marx overturned Hegel's idealist dualism and replaced it with a materialist dogma. Material being, for Marx, determined consciousness, and not the other way around. He distinguished the material aspects within society, such as land, goods, and the means of production, money, capital, and property, from ideal aspects, such as values, ideologies, religious belief, class consciousness, and knowledge. This division, notwithstanding the inverted hierarchy, neatly followed the dualist models of the past by distinguishing between material, economic, and ideal, the law, religion, and morality, forces that strive for control over one another. Marx was unable to acknowledge an essential difference with respect to the functioning of the economy between what may be called material and virtual aspects, or in terms of systems theory, between society and its environment. Land, goods, and the means of production are in fact not social. They exist in the material environment of society. Money, capital, and property, on the contrary, are social. They are virtual social constructs. That is, they are communicative constructs, or more precisely, economic constructs. Land, goods, and machines can well exist in a society that has no economy, in the sense that it does not communicate economically. Land, for instance, before the evolution of money, capital, and property, did not yet have economic meaning in the modern sense of the term economy. It may well have been used to feed people and animals, but it was not yet observed in economic terms. Native Americans, for instance, often could not understand the social construct of selling land when confronted with European settlers who wanted them to do exactly this. In order to observe land economically and to sell and buy it, there has to be an economic communication system within which the transaction of selling land becomes meaningful. The economic meaning of land is, once again, not an effect of the material qualities of the land, but of how its value is observed and thus socially constructed in the economy. In this sense, the economy is not material, it is social. Marx was unable to see the decisive difference between the economy as a virtual communication system and its material environment. The economy is a communication system that exists within the social environment, which is constituted by the law, politics, and education, and so on. And the extra-social environment of living and psychic systems, that is, bodies, trees, land, human thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and so on. I don't know if I necessarily agree with Moeller there. I don't think I disagree. But that definitely seems like a pretty bold statement to make. And in general, when people make bold statements, I become wary of enthusiastic agreement or enthusiastic disagreement. But also, I'm currently doing this deep dive on capital, so that's probably something I'll keep my eyes out for. I'll stay attuned to that as Dave and I read Capital every Monday for the foreseeable future. We just got going, and it's dope. It's exciting. Go over to Theory Underground and check out what's coming. And actually, I think the first Capital Monday video is up. So there's a few more. We finished Heinrich's introduction to the 3 volumes of Capital, and we actually got started on Capital. But the first video from that is up. But yeah, I think I'm going to keep an eye out for that, because I don't know if Marx is incapable of seeing the distinction between this system and its environment. Maybe he is. Maybe he's right. Maybe, I don't know. From a systemic perspective, Marx's analysis of capitalist economy had 2 basic flaws. The first, the failure to properly distinguish between what belongs to the functioning of the economy as a social system and what belongs to its non-social environment. And the second, the failure to go beyond the traditional cybernetic concept of a hierarchical steering relation between different systemic realms. Marx still assumed that one system, namely the economy, could determine and therefore mechanically steer all other aspects of society. The traditional Marxist vocabulary that distinguishes between a base structure, the economy, and a superstructure, all other systems, in society demonstrates the mechanistic architecture of this theory. Society is described as a simple machine consisting of 2 basic components, one being in control and the other being controlled. It may thus be said, somewhat ironically, the dualist heritage prevented even a revolutionary theory like Marxism from developing truly radical alternatives to traditional Platonic conceptions of society. Okay. System, environment, multiplicity. No nexus. In comparison with 19th and 20th century social theory, recent developments in the theory of consciousness, both popular and scientific, depart more radically from a dualist Platonic ontology, but not necessarily from Cartesian mechanics. It is quite common for people to assume that our mental processes are subject to both biological and communicative influences. Our thoughts and feelings, it is believed, are somehow related not only to what happens in our brain, but also to what we experience in our social life. It is also acknowledged that a malfunction of certain neurological transmitters in our brain may have strong effects on our psychic well-being, as well as on our capabilities of going to work or living within a family. Perhaps by allowing for a triad of physical, mental, and social phenomena, psychological common sense has developed in a more complex way and distanced itself from Platonic dualism more than our current sociological and political self-descriptions. Psychological common sense seems to accept the concept of a functional differentiation between what happens, respectively, in our brains, in our minds, and in our social life. But another major obstacle that prevents a radical departure from the Cartesian model, unfortunately, remains. Descartes explicitly calls the pineal gland the principal seat of the mind. This concept of a location of the mind within the body was and remains an obstacle for a systemic understanding of the relation between mind, body, and other systems. In ancient Greece and ancient China, the heart was believed to be the principal seat of human consciousness. In the contemporary world, the brain is ascribed this role, so that the image of a physical place of the mind still remains. Not only metaphorically, but literally, the mind and brain are often linguistically identified with one another. The image of two distinct systems coupled by the physical mechanism of a seat is misleading. It implies a causal link between two otherwise separate realms, along with the idea of at least potential control. When I am physically sitting in the driver's seat, I can, by being linked to it through all kinds of mechanisms, such as the steering wheel and the accelerator, control the motions of my car. I am not simply the environment of the car, like the street or the air. I am located within it and at its center. Similarly, one can imagine not only a dualist, but also triadic and pluralist mechanistic cybernetics. It can be imagined, as perhaps some brain scientists and psychiatrists do, that by manipulating certain mechanisms in the brain, it will be possible to steer mental processes. Or, as perhaps some behaviorists or psychotherapists may believe, we may be able to control our mental process by making people act or speak in a certain way. To proceed from dualism to a systemic triadism or pluralism is therefore not yet sufficient for radically solving the mind-body problem. In order to do this, we must discard not only Platonic ontology, but also Cartesian mechanics. Systems theory should more appropriately be called system-environment theory. For Luhmann, the system-environment distinction replaces the subject-object distinction and revolutionizes the classical epistemology that comes with it. This has at least two important consequences. The first, the notion of a unilateral control by an active subject over a passive object has to be replaced by the notion of mutual feedback effects between systems that form a cybernetic circle. And the second, the notion of an objective external view on internally accessible subjects has to be replaced by the distinction between operations that belong to any given system and those that occur in its environment, which is constituted by other systems. The terms system and environment are mutually dependent. An environment does not exist objectively, but only in relation to a specific system. That is, the environment is never the environment as such, but a concrete environment for a concrete system. Similarly, a system cannot exist subjectively on its own as the system, but only within an environment. While a system operates autonomously, it is existentially inconceivable without, and therefore entirely dependent upon, its environment. And this, in Luhmann, this system environment, interrelation and codependency is where I draw a line between Luhmann and Heidegger, where things are what they are in reference to everything else. And there's always like a for the sake of which. And that's what makes things what they are. That the situation that they're in is what makes things what they are. Yeah, I really like that a lot. And I don't know, that's another thing that I'm going to continue thinking about. And hopefully one day write about, maybe. I don't know. I stress again that despite the fact that systems theory usually speaks of systems, for lack of a more precise vocabulary, as being in or within an environment, this should not be confused with the Cartesian idea of a principal seat. A system has no seat in its environment in the sense of a specific location. Or, to give a probably all too simplistic example, a fish has no principal seat in the water. That a system is within an environment means that it functions while other systems function simultaneously. A more appropriate example than the fish in the water is the immune system. We can well say that the immune system is within the body, but this does not mean that it has any principal seat in the body. Yo, Salamoon DaCosta, what's crack-a-lackin'? Just came to say hello. Hello. We can well say that the immune system is within the body, but this does not mean that it has any principal seat in the body. The immune system can only exist within the complex environment of the body. It cannot work without blood circulation, digestive processes, and respiratory activity all functioning simultaneously. There is, however, no pineal or other gland that serves as the nexus between the immune system and its bodily environment. The very concept of a nexus is what the system-environment distinction is no longer in need of. And it was precisely this problem of the nexus that Cartesian mind-body dualism was unable to convincingly solve. Just as the immune system has no specific seat in the body, systems theory argues the mind has none, neither in the heart, the brain, or anywhere else in the body. Neither does it have a seat in the family, in one's job, in one's religion, or anywhere else in society. The mind, if conceived of as a human being's mental system, has no seat whatsoever. It is, however, only able to function within the environment, or if this should be a more acceptable term, the context of the simultaneous functioning of a great number of other biological and social systems. That the immune system does not have a seat in the body does not mean that it can exist outside of a bodily environment. The same is true for the mind as a non-biological system. The search for a seat of the mind has been a phantom created by the mechanistic cybernetics inherent to the mind-body dualist tradition as exemplified by Descartes. Once one radically breaks with this tradition, the seat becomes a mere chimera. Instead of a simplistic mind-body dualism, systems theory suggests a highly complex pluralism of simultaneously operating systems. Even the brain is not one system. There are, to my knowledge, a great number of functions that constitute brain activity, including electrical, hormonal, neural, chemical, blood circulatory, cellular functions, and so on. The brain is a very complex biological systemic. The brain is a very complex biological systemic arrangement of various systemic functions. Not only is there no nexus between the brain as a whole and the mind, but there are also no discernible nexi between the specific biological systems functioning in the brain or between those specific systems and the mind. And side note, yeah, I was always fascinated by like brain scans of people, and they're like, yeah, we can tell this is like the frontal lobe or cortex, or I'm not a brain scientist, I don't know, but they're like, this is where language processing happens, and this is where memory happens, and this is where smell processing happens, and this and that. Like, I don't know. I always thought it was kind of weird. I'm sure we can kind of tell to some extent like what areas of the brain are active when certain processes are taking place. But I don't know, like I don't think it's that easy. Like I don't think there are definite regions of the brain that handle certain processes. Like, and we see this like with damage to like the corpus callosum. There's weird, stuff that goes on with people's brains where they can develop different personalities. Or what was the guy, Finnegan, or I don't remember his name, but he had like the railroad spike that like took out a huge section of his brain, but he continued living and developed a new personality, but he like functioned. I think it's true that there are no concrete specific regions in the brain. I think it's all, again, like an interconnected, interdependent web. There's however many neurons we have in our brain, like 100 billion or something, and they're all like doing operations together interdependently. So yeah, I think it's weird to think that there are specific brain regions that handle specific functions. But again, there are, of course, there are tendencies, but tendencies aren't like, certain concrete 100% prescriptions, right? They're just descriptions of what's going on or what tends to go on. So our minds operate within both a bodily and a social environment. Language acquisition, cognitive development, emotional activity, and so on all have a lot to do not only with what goes on in our bodies, including the brain, but also with our social experiences. Again, there's no principal seat of the mind in society or of society in the mind. There is no gland by which how we communicate in our family, at our jobs, or with our money enters into our mind, or vice versa. Taking a psychopharmacological drug will have an effect on one's body. It will have an effect on how you think and feel, which will ultimately have an effect on how you talk and what you do in society. Similarly, communicating with a psychotherapist will have an effect on how you think and feel, and this will also have effects on your body and brain. Physical, social, and mental systems function simultaneously and constitute environments for one another. Given the complexity and plurality of simultaneous system-environment relations and the absence of any mechanical nexus between them, the effects of what happens in one system on what happens in another are at the same time limited and unlimited. They are limited in the sense that, given the absence of a causal nexus, they are not precisely predictable. They are unlimited in the sense that the effects are likely to produce further effects on a number of other systems that they were not intended to have an effect on. The problems attached to the so-called side effects of, for instance, psychopharmacological medication may illustrate this. The notion of side effects is misleading because it suggests that taking a certain drug will have a particular mechanical effect via one's body, one's brain, on one's mind, as well as some other less central effects that somehow do not fully count as effects since they are merely on the side. The distinction between central and side effects, however, is entirely arbitrary and a merely semantic gesture. The side effect is no less an effect than the central effect. With respect to a computer keyboard, for instance, the repeated pressing of the Y key has the effect that many Ys appear on the screen, and that over time, the Y printed on the keyboard becomes less visible. One may distinguish between intended and unintended effects in this case, but not between side effect and central effect. The inference, which may well be drawn by a naive reader of a medication package, that the anticipation of effects, both central and side, can ever be complete is much more problematic. Even if the desired effect of a psychopharmacological medication should come about in the body, let's say a modification of certain chemical processes in the brain, it is very difficult to predict if this desired effect in the body will also produce the desired effect in the mind, let's say the disappearance of anxiety. And it is even more difficult to predict what an effect in one system of the body, brain chemistry, will have on other bodily functions. Sexual performance capacity, for instance, particularly in the long run. Usually, previously unknown side effects of taking a drug only emerge after a certain period of regular consumption. Furthermore, it is impossible to predict how a drug's mental and physical effects will, in turn, affect one's social life. What will the effect be of both decreased anxiety and decreased sexual performance capacity on one's family life, on one's professional life, on one's attitude towards spending money? To add another dimension of system-environment relations, what happens simultaneously to the taking of the drug and other aspects of one's life is entirely uncontrollable. Maybe the patient has some yet undiagnosed cancer. Maybe he catches the flu. Maybe there will be a rise in taxes or a loss in the value of his property. Maybe he will be promoted to a position that he feels unable to cope with. Maybe he falls in love, or maybe no rain will fall for 2 weeks. Any of these events will resonate with the event of taking the drug, and vice versa. This is obviously not to say that taking such a drug has no effect, or that it has bad effects, or that one should not take drugs. It is only to say that it is no more than a fiction to assume that taking a drug works in any way similar to the Cartesian model of the pineal gland mechanism. The human body does not work like a car. It is embedded in highly complex system-environment connections stretching over many different systemic realms. Mental, physical, and social systems, and perhaps others, are integrated into complex system-environment relations that, in Luhmann's words, cut through causal connections. Therefore, strictly speaking, taking a drug does not cause anything. In Luhmannian terminology, it irritates or perturbs a large number of bodily, mental, and social systemic processes. All these systemic processes incessantly produce mutual resonance. The world does not remain the same afterward, or at least this would be a very unlikely effect of the irritation or perturbation. The traditional notion of causality becomes highly problematic with respect to system-environment relations. Not entirely like Hume's famous reflections on causality with respect to the playing of billiards, social systems theory looks at the cause and effect relation primarily as an ascription. Cause and effect are not objective categories, but systemic constructs, which is obvious with respect to the dubious notion of a side effect. Causes and effects that are observed are, like all other observations, dependent on the observing system and its means of observation. The effects of taking a medical drug will be observed differently by the doctor, the patient, the pharmacological company, the medical insurance company, and so on. There's no such thing as the effect as such. The effects on the doctor's professional reputation, the pharmaceutical company's balance sheet, the patient's digestive system, his mental well-being, his wife's sex life, and so on are all effects. What they are depends on the observational capabilities with which the various systems perceiving the effects are equipped. None of the effects can be labeled the central or proper effect as opposed to side effects. Such an ascription depends entirely on what is classified as central and peripheral by an observer. Side effects, like root causes, are semantic or ideological constructs. Medical professionals, just like meteorologists and business consultants, are therefore, perhaps unbeknownst to themselves, far more post-Platonic and post-Cartesian than most academic social theorists or philosophers. Instead of believing in mind-body dualisms and root causes, specialists in medicine have largely, due to the progress of statistics, abandoned simplistic dualist and cause and effect models. By extension, they have also abandoned the belief that they can take control of what they are professionally dealing with. Instead, they operate with probabilities. In North America, a doctor will often let you know the probability of success of a specific treatment. A meteorologist will tell you the probability of rain tomorrow, and a business consultant will inform you about the probable profit of a certain investment. This means that implicitly, these people have quietly accepted the multiplicity of systems and the absence of a causal nexus between them. There is a chance that what they do will bring about some desired effects, that their projections will be more or less correct, but there is also a chance that they won't. These people are aware that the probabilities with which they are working are only probable probabilities. In this way, Luhmann's theory may be the last footnote to Plato, which many professionals in contemporary society, unlike we academic scholars, don't even need to read anymore. Luhmann successfully dissolved the traditional mind-body triple dualism. First, instead of an ontological division between ideal and material existence, there is a distinction between at least 3, and potentially many more, kinds of systemic functions. There are psychic systems, living systems, and social systems. They do not split the world into a hierarchical structure of being, but into a complex arrangement of system-environment relations without any particular order. Second, instead of the hierarchical epistemological division between two kinds of knowledge, there is a differentiation between types of observation. Systems are observing systems and have their own internal capabilities for producing knowledge or cognition of their environment and of themselves. There is no privileged observatory platform, and knowledge does not grant the ability to come to unequivocal conclusions or predictions. Observations are equally dependent on their operational modes. Third, the ethical distinction between ideal and material values and the subsequent formulation of normative prescriptions is simply absent from systems theory. It is, at least in its Luhmannian form, non-ethical and amoral, and does not ascribe moral superiority or inferiority to any specific kind of system. It does not, for instance, repeat the traditional moral imperative that the intellect ought to subdue the body. I like that a lot. That makes me think of Baudrillard in is it Symbolic Exchange and Death, when he's talking about the duopoly and he's talking about how testing posits, like if it's a binary test, it's already positing the answer, and like the 1, 2 or 0, 1 or yes, no, or whatever condition doesn't really matter, because like setting up the binary in the first place, it's already like positing the presupposition. When, yeah, like your position of observation is going to maybe not determine, but greatly influence the observation that you're going to make in the first place. And maybe like in a simple observational system, in quotes, in a simple one, maybe it will determine the observation. But yeah, like with people, what you're paying attention to or what matters to you, sure, it doesn't determine, but it greatly influences what's going to jump out at you, and what you're going to observe, and how you're going to form your interpretation, and how you're going to like reintegrate that back into whatever it is you got going on. I'm going to run to the bathroom. And then I'll be right back, and all that fun stuff. So I will be right back. Bathroom time.
In the U.S. was made easier by the rather early innovation of what's called neo-imperialism.
Guided more by the problem than by the discipline that I started out working. I mean, when I look at a college curriculum and see how it's divided, and we've got curriculum committees that redivide them like once a week or once a month, and then once a year, I don't give a damn what studies this or who talks about it, but that it's
but nobody ever asked, well, why? Why are they doing all this stuff?
produces a situation in which human beings themselves don't feel rational.
In the U.S. was made made easier by the rather early innovation of what's called neo-imperialism. Or
guided more by the problem than by the discipline that I started out working. I mean, when I look at a college curriculum and see how it's divided, and we've got curriculum committees that redivide them like once a week or once a month and once a year, I mean, I don't give a damn what studies this or who talks about it, but that it's
Okie dokie, artichoke. What's cracker lacking? So now we'll get into chapter 6, ecological evolution, a challenge to social creationism. Someone left a comment on a video the other day and they were like, hey man, don't chew while you read or something. Don't chew while you talk, don't chew while you read. I don't know. It's like, yeah, I get it. But also I chew all day long. And I read a lot. So I don't know what to tell you, man. I mean, I wish I could help you. And not because like I care, but like if I stop chewing, that would like be good for me. But also like, don't be like, for the love of God, don't do that. Like, what do you mean when you say that? Are you like, don't do that because it annoys me? Because I don't care if it annoys you. Or are you like, don't do that because it's bad for you? It's like, yeah, I know it's bad for me, dude. That's why I do it. I mean, that kind of is part of why people are addicted to cigarettes and chew, right? Because we know it's bad for us. And that's why it's so enticing. But yeah, man, don't be like that. Like, you're like, for the love of God, don't do that thing. Like, that only makes me want to do it more. Like, if you don't want me to do it, I don't know, come up with like something cooler to say. Like, oh, it's lame. It's lame that you chew. Because yeah, I agree, it is lame. Chew is gross and it's expensive and it sucks. But don't be like, for the love of God, don't do that. Like, that's just gonna egg me on. You should have been like, oh, what a loser, dude. You're a stupid loser. And then I would have been self-conscious and I would have like, well, I obviously have been thinking about it for a few days. Anyway, here we go. Chapter 6, Ecological Evolution, a challenge to social creationism. Relatively speaking, one of the less conspicuous radical aspects of Luhmann's theory is his application of the theory of evolution to sociology. This may seem a somewhat strange point to make, given that the theory of evolution is no longer considered all that scandalous, at least outside of North American fundamentalist Protestant circles. The same may be the case with respect to biology, but Luhmann's use of evolutionary theory for a theory of society is, I believe, quite provocative. I agree. That's one of the things I don't like about it. But let's see what Moeller has to say. Although Luhmann is not a social Darwinist and has little in common with Herbert Spencer, his evolutionary approach is nevertheless at odds with the dominant liberal and humanist views on society, which can often be understood historically as secularized successors of Christian ideas. Luhmann's theory radically breaks with anthropocentric. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, I'm back. See, that right there. That's the machine. The machine is in the driver's seat. The algorithm has latched onto my pineal gland. And it's the same for every single one of us. And it's not algorithms. And it's not true. I'm making like an incorrect analogy here, but something's definitely going on. Like when you get a notification, you're like, oh, I have to check my notification. And it like stops. It like every other part of what's going on in your thought process stops. And you're like, oh, I have to figure out this notification. I have to check it. I have to see what it means. And I have to like gauge, do I have to respond or not? And like, really, no, you don't have to respond. First of all, like if an emergency was happening, someone wouldn't text me or email me. They would call me a billion times and I'd be like, fuck, I need to answer the phone and see what's going on. So this anxiety of like, I need to check. You know what? Fuck it. It's an intermission here. I'll talk about this. And then we'll jump back into reading Luhmann. But yeah, this is a little intermission. Here we go. So today, December 7th, 2023. Today is the 10-year anniversary of my wife dying. She died December 7th, 2013. So 10 years ago today, that happened. And I don't want to like talk about details or whatever, but for years, and I really only just kind of got over it recently, the last couple of years, but for years after, I just had such bad anxiety and other stuff too. But like my anxiety was horrible. And with friends and family, I would freak the fuck out if I texted them and they didn't immediately respond or respond within like a couple minutes. I would freak the fuck out. And I justified it by saying like, I'm worried. And it would be the dumbest text in the world. I would be like not if it was some dumb shit. Like if it was like, I don't know, some dumb random text. But if I asked them a question and I didn't get a response to my question, but I was like, hey, what time are you going to be at this place? Or, hey, would you like me to bring this? Or, hey, what time are you going to be here? Or any of these types of questions where it's like, you would expect a response. If I didn't get basically an immediate response, I would freak the fuck out. And I mean, like, I would text them over and over and over again, 10, 15 texts, and I would call them and call them and call them until they answered. And they'd be like, what's up? What's wrong? Are you okay? And I'd be like, yeah, you didn't respond to me. And it was like a severe anxiety. And it sucks. It's horrible, right? But I used to justify it like, oh, I'm worried. I'm worried. And there, I mean, of course there was like some like trauma or whatever. And I did enter like a panic. Like if I would text my sister and she didn't respond, I would panic. I'd be like, oh my God, something horrible has happened. And I would like relive the trauma in my head or whatever. But that's not like normal. That's not a good thing, right? Like, and I think we all, at least to some degree, experience that anxiety that revolves around notifications and text messages, where if it's an incoming notification, there is a hint of this anxiety of like, it might be important. I might need to drop whatever I'm doing and respond. Or I might need to drop whatever I'm doing and like go tend to some emergency. But you're not. You don't. No one's going to text message you, their house is on fire. I mean, maybe if their house caught on fire and you live in a different city and they're like, whoa, my house just burnt down. Isn't that crazy? But if there's something that like requires your immediate attention, it's not going to come in a text message. It's not going to come in an email. It's not even going to come in a single phone call. Like if there is an emergency, they'll let you know. Like, and if they think a single text message is an effective way of letting you know there's an emergency going on, then I don't know, there's probably a lot of unhealthy shit going on in that relationship. And that person should probably reevaluate some things in their life that they think a single text message is sufficient notification about some emergency. And not like, and even if it is an emergency, like even if my sister who lives in Texas, even if it is like, oh, my house is on fire, like, what am I going to do about it? I'm in Arizona. Like, it takes me like 12 hours to drive to her house. So it's not like she would text me and say, my house is on fire, come pick me up. That would be a phone call. And that would be like, oh, you know, I'll have to get a plane ticket and I'll be there in 6 hours. But it definitely wouldn't be a single text message. And then on the other end of that, it's like, oh, if you text someone or email them or DM them or whatever, and they don't reply, maybe not immediately, but if they don't respond within whatever period of time it is, you start to get a weird anxiety. When in reality, like if I have something that I feel like I need to talk to someone about, I will call them or text them multiple times if I know I can't call them or whatever. Like I'll make sure to do my part to get their attention, and actually engage in effective communication. Not just like, oh, I sent you a text and you didn't respond, so now something is broken in our relationship. No, because like I understand, like in an ideal world, we wouldn't immediately drop everything and respond to every single notification, because it would be like, no, like if I need to talk to someone, I'm going to pick up my phone and call them. Or better yet, I'm going to like try to go see them in person. And of course, we have so many relationships and interactions with people who we're not geographically close to. So it's not like you can always just go see someone, but you can go out of your way to like, hey, let's set up a call. Let's do a video call, or let's do a phone call or whatever. I don't know. It's just weird. But that was an instance of me getting sidetracked by notification, and my brain stopped. And it was just like, I was reading this book and then like, I was like, oh, there's a notification. Is it important? No, it's not important. It's not important. If it was important, my phone would be ringing off the hook. If it was important, somebody would come in here and open the door to my office and say, your house is on fire. Get up. Like, I don't know. I don't even know why I started talking about that, but because it was a good example of getting sidetracked by notifications. So anyway, this is a little end to that intermission. We'll get back into chapter 6. And then maybe we'll do chapter 7, maybe not. I don't know. We'll see what goes on. I am probably going to go eat soon. So chapter 6, ecological evolution. I'm just going to restart. So here we go. Ecological evolution, a challenge to social creationism. Relatively speaking, one of the less conspicuous radical aspects of Luhmann's theory is his application of the theory of evolution to sociology. This may seem a somewhat strange point to make, given that the theory of evolution is no longer considered all that scandalous, at least outside of North American fundamentalist Protestant circles. The same may be the case with respect to biology, but Luhmann's use of evolutionary theory for a theory of society is, I believe, quite provocative. Although Luhmann is not a social Darwinist and has little in common with Herbert Spencer, his evolutionary approach is nevertheless at odds with the dominant liberal and humanist views on society, which can often be understood historically as secularized successors of Christian ideas. Luhmann's theory radically breaks with anthropocentric views of society, just as Darwin broke with the Christian idea of the human being as the crown of creation. Thus, Luhmann's radical evolutionary view of society, which was decisively shaped by the post-Darwinian evolutionary biologists Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, when viewed from mainstream humanist post-Christian social theory, has the potential to be as offensive as Darwin's biological theory once was. Evolution for Luhmann emerges as the complex co-evolution of system-environment relations. In Darwin's vocabulary, evolution is the evolution of a species that constitute environments for one another. Let me reread that. In Darwin's vocabulary, evolution is the evolution of species that constitute environments for one another. An ecosystem indicates the coexistence of a great variety of life systems without a center or a general steering mechanism. Within an ecosystem, all subsystems co-evolve. A change in one subsystem, let's say a change in the oxygen level of the water in a lake, perturbs the plants in the lake and triggers evolutionary changes in them. This also triggers evolutionary changes in the fish. These evolutionary changes will again have an effect on the chemistry of the water, and so on. All of these things happen simultaneously. Coevolution means there are permanent feedback mechanisms between a multiplicity of simultaneously evolving systems. Changes trigger changes that trigger changes, and so on. Such a basic evolutionary model contradicts the central idea of creationism, namely the primacy of an external or initial act of creation, or intelligent design. A co-evolutionary ecosystem is self-generating and self-contained and not designed or based on any specific a priori input. The difference between a theory of evolution and creationism parallels the difference between a theory of immanence on the one side and theories of transcendence or transcendental theories on the other. While current social theories are no longer transcendent and commonly do not speak about divine origins of social phenomena, they are often transcendental theories, to use the Kantian term, and thus represent, so to speak, a kind of secular social creationism. Unfortunately, in English academic language, the foundational Kantian distinction between transcendent and transcendental is mostly ignored, and the terms transcendent and transcendental are often used synonymously or interchangeably. Kant, however, used the term transcendental in particular to distinguish his philosophy from previous transcendent metaphysics. For him, transcendent meant beyond experience. God, for instance, is transcendent, whereas transcendental referred to whatever precedes experience in the sense of the being. Jesus Christ. Whereas transcendental referred to whatever precedes experience in the sense of being the, or a, condition of the possibility of experience. So that, just real quick, that the transcendental referred to whatever precedes experience in the sense of being the or a condition of the possibility of experience. So that's like a framework for, or equipment for, or capabilities or capacity for having the experience. Just to, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, transcendental is what is a priori in this sense, namely what is prior to or pure of anything empirical. Many contemporary social theories are, though certainly not transcendent, still in a post-Kantian sense, transcendental theories of society. As such, they are still essentially incompatible with a radical evolutionary theory of society that is radically immanent and leaves no room for any a priori social principles. Modern and contemporary social theories, like those of Hobbes and Rousseau, Habermas and Rawls, can be called transcendental. They at least hypothetically think that society either is or should be founded on some sort of a priori mechanism or basis for intrasocial consensus, such as a contract, a commitment to reason, or a definition of fairness. Society is assumed to have access to something that is not itself social, but an a priori condition for society to function well. Society, according to these models, can only be enacted properly if it adheres to certain principles. These principles are most commonly believed to be civil principles, That is, they are related to specifically human characteristics such as human nature, free will, human rationality, human rights, and so on. In this way, these transcendental theories of society are also inherently humanist, or more precisely, anthropocentric. Luhmann's theory of society, like Darwin's theory of evolution, is not. One profound difference between creationism and a theory of evolution is the idea of a plan. Creation is not random or involuntary. It involves intentionality. It involves action and agency. This agency can be transcendent or transcendental. In the first case, the agent is of divine nature, that is, a god. In the second, agency is this worldly. Evolutionary theory, however, denies both sacred and secular agency. An ecosystem cannot intentionally evolve. It neither enacts God's will nor freely determines how to develop itself. Luhmann's social theory has been criticized, in precisely this context, as being metabiological by Habermas, because it follows evolutionary biology in denying not only transcendent, but also transcendental agency and intentionality. This is what makes Luhmann as scandalous in social theory today as Darwin's theory was in the context of 19th century biology. Humans are no longer capable of their own development, but are simply an element within a highly complex system, environment, entanglements. To take evolution seriously means to take the notion of environment seriously, and therefore to undermine the concepts of intentionality, planning, and free will. None of the post-Kantian transcendental and anthropocentric social theories can be truly ecological, so long as they ascribe the capabilities of design and agency to a privileged species. Conventional transcendental social theories are incompatible with radically ecological and evolutionary social theories such as Luhmann's. While many progressives, and to a certain extent leftist, at least in their own view, social theoreticians like Habermas take great pains to come up with non-hierarchical or egalitarian visions of society that eliminate structures of domination. They cannot be classified as non-centrist thinkers. Typically, these theorists affirm the central role of politics, or the economy, or both together, in society. If society is, in a post-Kantian sense, to rationally determine its own future, then there has to be a central planning agency for directing this development. This agency, as is the case for Habermas, may well be supposed to be democratic. That is, collective, non-repressive, and non-authoritarian. But it nevertheless has to have some sort of social centrality. It must have some authority over law, the economy, education, religion, and so on, in order to ensure that society progresses in the right way. Luhmann, the evolutionary theoretician, goes against such a centrist vision. Instead, he develops a polycentric and accordingly polycontextual theory in an acentrically conceived world and society. An ecosystem has no center. Evolution does not follow any guidelines or directives given by any of its subsystems. Subsystems are not egalitarian or democratic in the sense that each system has a right. Subsystems are not egalitarian or democratic in the sense that each system has the right to make a contribution in determining where evolution goes. Subsystems may compete for survival, and in the long run, most of them will simply dissolve since they cannot plan their own future or the future of the whole. There is no institution inherent in evolutionary processes that a system may appeal to, or, for instance, complain to that its extinction is unjust, unfair, or irrational. A social theory that takes evolution seriously will therefore not only disappoint, but most likely offend those social theorists who think that even if such institutions may not yet exist or may not yet be perfect, they should at least be aspired to. Evolutionary theory, however, does not allow for such aspirations. Modern social theories rooted in the Enlightenment hope that society can elucidate itself in a twofold sense. It has the ability to see itself more clearly and gain, at least potentially, a more or less complete understanding of itself, and it can work toward making itself brighter, that is, happier and better in a moral or pragmatic way, or both. An evolutionary theory is, in a sense, a counter-Enlightenment theory, since it theoretically excludes both of these achievements. A thoroughly immanent ecosystem, be it biological, mental, or social, does not, so to speak, include its own light switch. As Luhmann pointed out regularly, an observing system can, paradoxically, often see only what it cannot see and what others cannot see. It can detect the blind spots of other systems and thereby draw some conclusions about its own. A perfect illumination is theoretically impossible. Light and darkness, metaphorically speaking, and alluding to Taoism, constitute each other in an evolutionary context. The very condition of seeing something is not to see everything. The ability to observe, paradoxically, also implies limitations, and thus inabilities of observation. The partial blindness that comes with evolution also implies a certain ethical and pragmatic blindness. Since it is impossible to see everything, it is also impossible to see what is good for all. An ecosystem that cannot know itself and that cannot know its future and also cannot know what it should ultimately hope for. Let me reread that. An ecosystem that cannot know itself and that cannot know its future also cannot know what it should ultimately hope for. How can today's species know what will be good for future species? A bright future for one species implies necessarily, according to Darwin's theory, a dark future for others. The application of such a view on social theory must be deeply disconcerting for any sociologist or philosopher who shares the Enlightenment vision of a self-illuminating society. A major Enlightenment narrative immediately connected with the program of self-illumination was the belief in progress. Enlightenment as a process of human self-illumination is, both cognitively and practically, quite necessarily geared toward improvement. The natural sciences provide us with more knowledge. New technologies enhance our capacities and productivity and increase our material well-being. The social sciences, it was hoped, would provide us with expertise in social engineering so that we would be able to rationalize and optimize our political and economical life. Education was consequently seen as the means to lead ourselves out of our self-inflicted immaturity, to use the famous Kantian expression. Thinkers like Hegel, Marx, and the French positivists, Comte and others, subsequently came up with some of the grand 19th century descriptions of a historical march to the light, of inevitable progress to our greater human self-realization, in the double meaning of this term, that is, both epistemologically and existentially. The 19th century has been qualified as the century of historicism. This not only indicates a focus on the inherent historicity and dynamics of life, but also a belief in the possibility of a science of history. History could finally be understood by those who make it. Marx is probably the prime example for such an attempt to identify the laws of history which, in the past, had shaped social developments unbeknownst to those who actually constituted or performed them. It was believed that an adequate analysis of the historical movement would enable humankind to actually make history rather than simply be moved forward through it. Instead of merely interpreting history, a historically informed social science would enable us to enact change rather than be merely subjected to it. In this sense, liberation for Marx also meant historical liberation rather than being determined and dominated by history. Humankind would now be able to determine and dominate it. Progress came to mean not only a development toward a better state, but also, and perhaps even more important, a self-conscious motion. Progress thus meant to deliberately and actively move forward, to go on by one's own will and in the direction that one set out beforehand. the Enlightenment narrative of historical progress was soon questioned. Nietzsche replaced history with genealogy. Nietzsche, as well as many of the leading theorists of the 20th century who were substantially influenced by him, one may think of Freud and Foucault in particular, was less optimistic about the idea of progress. On the one hand, these thinkers fully acknowledged the idea that we are. On the one hand, these thinkers fully acknowledge the idea that what we are is an effect of what we have been. Wessen ist, was gewesen ist, as Hegel succinctly put it. On the other hand, they did not really share the belief in the possibility of rationally improving the course of history. Simply put, genealogy may be defined as history minus progress. To understand our heritage does not necessarily mean that we can change or control it. Genetic engineering may, in fact, from the perspective of a genealogy, turn out to be as futile as attempts at social engineering. Just as it is highly questionable how improved genetically modified food actually is, it is questionable how much improvement was brought about by the experiments in transforming historical knowledge into social progress. In this sense, Luhmann's theory of social evolution fundamentally differs both from the In this sense, Luhmann's theory of social evolution fundamentally differs both from the historicist social theories of the 19th century and from Darwin's biological theory of evolution. For Darwin, in line with his historicist contemporaries, biological evolution was a story of progress. Evolution meant survival of the fittest. And to be fit, as in contemporary popular usage, connoted being good, or at least better than the unfits. Similarly, natural selection meant the selection of the better over the worse. Darwin explicitly pointed out how immeasurably superior natural selection was compared with man's feeble efforts to perfect living organisms over time. This meant for Darwin that nature was even more concerned with bringing about biological advancement than, let us say, human horse breeders. Given this focus on improvement through selection, Herbert Spencer's social theory has rightly been labeled social Darwinism, since it also conceives of evolution as progress, as a development toward the better. And here, hold on one second. Here is where French bulldogs become relevant, because French bulldogs and English bulldogs, and I guess all dogs, were genetic experiments undertaken by people who wanted better, in quotes, dogs. Now, French bulldogs are not better, in quotes, once again, dogs from the perspective of, well, what is a dog? Well, what is a dog, right? Is a dog a companion animal that makes you happy and keeps you company and snuggles you and kisses you and loves you? Or is a dog something that helps keep your campfire safe and helps you dispose of biological waste? Like, you can throw them the bones and they'll eat the bones, and that'll keep the bears away, and that'll keep the other snakes. And like what function is your dog performing? So if you want a cute, cuddly companion animal, then you can use this process of selection, this biological process, to, develop a better, cute, cuddly companion. And the French bulldog is that. The French bulldog couldn't live in the wild. They can't even be born naturally. They have to be cesarean births. So like the function, the utility of the animal is what determines whether or not you think it's better. So the position of the observer determines their perception and their interpretation. I want a cute, cuddly dog. I think French bulldogs are better for that purpose. If I wanted a safety dog, I probably wouldn't even get a dog. I would get a baby bear and I would train it. Like I would go to the wild and I would find a bear mama and I would give her some chloroform and then I would steal the baby bear puppy when it was just a little tiny baby. And then, oh, my book just fell. So I would have a little bear puppy. And then I would take it home and I would raise it up from a little baby and train it, and it would be my companion, and that would be my safety dog. And that would be a better dog. So like, taking out this progress, this idea of progress from this historical process. I like that. I think that's the appropriate view of history. So yeah, we should look at things that happened and not try to like project onto them our own goals and our own presuppositions and this and that. But that being said, French bulldogs are better dogs than like Chihuahuas and other dogs. They're just better. Anyway, Luhmann is not a social Darwinist in this sense. Social evolution for him, like biological evolution for post-Darwinist biologists, is not to be automatically equated with social progress. Functional differentiation is an effect of social evolution, but it is not in any general way better than stratified or segmentary differentiation. Evolution is not teleological. Its partial blindness does not allow it to take aim. Furthermore, the lack of a central force or socially progressive element, such as for Marx, the proletariat with the Communist Party as its avant-garde, makes it impossible to anticipate any specific course that history may take. Post-Darwinian ecological evolutionary theory, in both biology and sociology, is genealogical rather than historicist. It tries to understand its genes or its inherent heritage and does not continue the Enlightenment narrative of progress. It refrains from scientifically evaluating species according to their respective merits and does not rank social systems or social structures. This does not mean a postulation on the equality of all biological or social systems. It means refraining from constructing a narrative based on value judgments. Not making value judgments also means not proclaiming that all systems are equally valid. For a post-Darwinian ecological evolutionary theory, be it biological or sociological, development is contingent rather than necessary. But contingency is an ambiguous term. It means to exist despite other alternatives having been equally possible, and to come into existence as a result of previously existing conditions in the sense of being contingent upon. It implies, on the one hand, the coexistence of a plurality of options or alternatives without hierarchical order, and on the other hand, a non-arbitrary connection between what is and what has been. That there are horses is a contingent result of biological evolution in the sense that the emergence of other species or the extinction of the horse species would have been equally thinkable given the extreme variety of evolutionary possibilities at all times. But it also means that the current existence of the horse species can be traced genealogically to a very specific evolutionary development that actually took place. Luhmann often stresses the unlikelihood of whatever is actually brought into existence by evolution, given all of the innumerable developments that might have taken place instead. This takes nothing away from the important role that everything that did evolve has within evolution. That horses came into existence was not evolutionarily necessary. Now that there are horses, they influence further evolutionary developments and thereby limit evolutionary possibilities. that something like stocks and bonds came into existence in social reality was not historically necessary. However, now that there are stocks and bonds, further economic and thus social evolution is contingent upon their existence. Luhmannian ecological genealogy combines historical awareness with non-dogmatic pluralism. In an evolutionary context, the notion of contingency affirms both historical heritage and the openness to the future. It implies both a confirmation of the relevance of the actual and recognition of its aleatory character. Everything might have come about differently, but now that the die has been cast, there is no going back, and the options for the way forward are, although not predetermined, relatively limited by what is now the case. Historicist theoreticians of progress share, unlike evolutionary genealogists, some of the teleological fantasies of the secular creationists. If there is, at least potentially, a plan for the course of history, and if we can both know and guide, or at least accelerate this course, then radical contingency is unacceptable. For creationists and historicists, the course of history has a specific and necessary meaning and not only a contingent sense. That history has a meaning is to say that there is some thread that runs through it, that it somehow unfolds as a plan, that it has a discernible design and is therefore determined to lead somewhere. Evolutionary genealogy recognizes or observes that evolution makes sense. But this making of sense is an immanent evolutionary construct, a dynamic process of continual reinvention. From a genealogical evolutionary process, development is neither a priori nor teleologically determined. Sense, as a linguistic alternative to the term meaning, is made, while something has a meaning. In an ecosystem consisting of complex system-environment relations, sense is not singular. The system does not have a meaning, nor does it have any intention of pursuing a certain direction. What makes sense for one species does not necessarily make sense for another, and the evolutionary direction that the development of one species or biological system takes does not correspond to the direction of other species or systems in its environment. Human beings, for instance, have on average become a lot taller in recent centuries. This does not imply that other species became taller as well, or that evolution is generally aimed at tallness. Nevertheless, I am sure that the increased height of human beings will have perturbed the various subsystems within the human body and triggered certain evolutionary developments that biologists might be able to trace and make sense of. While there is no general meaning of having gotten taller, e.g. approaching a perfect human height, this change will help biologists make sense of a number of evolutionary changes in the human body, such as the muscular system. It can even help sociologists explain how sociological changes occur, such as the production of longer beds, while a social systems theorist might make sense of an increasing variety in furniture size. Marxists may detect the meaning of this development in an ever-expanding capitalist economy, and liberals may see it as an indication of the liberation of consumer choice. That was funny. Traditional historicist attempts to define the trajectory of historical progress are, from an evolutionary perspective, comparable to biological attempts to define the trajectory of progress in human height. Biologically, it is uncommon to conceive of increased human body height as an advancement toward an evolutionary goal. The idea of improving and purifying the biological development of human life was, in fact, one of the socio-biological experiments infamously conducted in the 20th century Europe. Such a biopolitical project is certainly not compatible with an ecological post-Darwinian view of evolution. Ecological evolutionary theory avoids evaluations in what is desirable and what is not. It does not identify a developmental direction, and it certainly does not try to give advice on how to help evolution move forward. From an Enlightenment perspective, this attitude may be criticized as a lack of engagement, but so far the concrete results of attempts to help either biological or social evolution reach its respective goals a little quicker have not been without their problems. If, as Habermas has done, one labels Luhmann's social theory as metabiological, then it should also be added, in order to avoid misunderstandings, that this means meta-evolutionary and not meta-creationist. While social theorists like Habermas worked on the unfinished project of enlightenment and its secularized creationist ideals, Luhmann subscribed to a radically different paradigm, namely the paradigm of ecological evolution. Oh, chapter 7, constructivism as postmodernist realism. I want to be really, really engaged for this chapter. So I am going to stop for now. I don't know. I might come back later. I might not. But this, yeah, that the last two chapters were good. There's a lot there. Some questions with Marx, some parallels with Levinas and Heidegger. Maybe not parallels, but some nodes or some nexi. No, definitely not nexi. Maybe some nodes of similarity, or at least some points that I would like to focus on in continuing to study with Levinas, with Heidegger, with Marx. There's some Baudrillard in there for sure. There's always this undercurrent of Hegel with all of it. So yeah, very, very good. But this is where the peanut butter and jelly is, and I definitely want to be fully engaged, and I'm just not fully engaged right now. I'm going to eat, probably take a little break for a little bit. And all that stuff. So yeah, this is Professor Hans-Georg Moeller's The Radical Luhmann. Bill recommended Moeller's Luhmann Explained From Souls to Systems is an excellent resource. I definitely am going to check that out too. As I've finished this book, as we continue reading Luhmann, Luhmann's Social Systems, and hopefully some of his other stuff, his books specifically on the mass media is another one I want to get into. So lots of stuff going on. Happy Thursday. Peace.